Hi, everybody. Welcome to my interviews workshop. So today I'm going to be going through all the things that you need to know for your interview. So how to prepare, what you need to do to get ready for that, some of the questions that they might ask you, but more importantly, why the employer might be asking you certain questions, and then some things that you can do afterwards to hopefully increase your chances of getting an interview. So I want you to think about your last interview. And for a lot of the clients that I work with, this might have happened in a different country. So it's really important to think what questions you were asked, how did you prepare for that, what did you wear, did you ask any questions of the interviewer? Because I'm going to be going through a lot of the standards for an interview in Canada. So it's good for you to think about how it might be in your own country so you can compare them. So I'm going to go through some of the things that you need to do to get ready for your interview and to help you prepare. So one of the most important things that you need to do is research the employer. You can Google them, you can ask people who may have worked there or who know someone who works there. It's really important to do your research, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation. So the next thing that you need to think about is what skills do you have to bring to the job? So in Canada, when you go for an interview, you're going to be expected to talk about your accomplishments and your skills, which is not the case depending on what country you might have come from. Some countries that's considered to be very rude, but in Canada it's really important that you're able to do this. So you need to know what skills you're going to bring to the job, and you can determine that. You can find that out by reading the job ad and saying, okay, all of these things apply to me. And you're going to have to be able to tell that to the employer. So that's a really important thing to know about interviews in Canada. You're going to be expected to sell yourself a little bit, to talk about your skills, which I know can be difficult for some clients. And contact your references. So this one, I know, again, if this is your first job in Canada, you might not have a Canadian job reference, but if you can, perhaps you could use a teacher if you were studying here, a professor, maybe somebody in the community that you've got to know who's well respected. It doesn't necessarily have to be from a job. It's great if you can have that. And if you can get a letter of reference from an employer from your last job, that's wonderful. If they're able to write it in English or French, that's fantastic. Or perhaps, you might even want to get it translated if possible. Having something from your last employer to attest that you were a good employee, you showed up on time, you did your best job, that's what employers are really looking for. However, I do understand how hard it is when you come to a new country, or like me, when I came back to Canada after having lived away for 5 years, I didn't have any, references that were recent. So it is difficult, but if you can get those letters of reference from your employer, so they would just write a letter saying, all of the good things that you did. And then if you can find some references, even like I said, as a teacher, or someone in the community here, that's really going to help you. And you need to ask them if they will be a reference for you, because after your interview, the employer might call these people or email them and ask them about you. So it's really important that the person that you've listed knows that this might happen, so they can start thinking about all the good things that they'd like to say about you. That's really important. So some things that you might need to bring with you, bring copies of your resume. So if you're going in person, have some copies ready in case there's more than one person there and they would like a copy. I always think it's a good idea to have a copy for yourself because when I get nervous, I tend to forget things, even my own work history sometimes. So it's a good idea to have it there to help you in front of you. If an employer is asking you about a certain job that you did, you have that information there. Any diplomas and certificates that you've earned, you can bring those. Also a piece of identification, piece of ID. So it could be your passport, it could be your permanent residency card, something to show that you are who you say you are. And your reference sheet. So typically we don't put our references on our resume. We have a separate sheet for that, and you can bring that. So if they ask you for your references, that's a really good sign that they might be considering you for the job. So it's a good idea to have that ready before. I like to bring a paper and pen because I personally like to write things down. And if you are working in a job where you have a portfolio, then you can bring that. People like artists, they might have a portfolio of their work, graphic designers, people like that. Some industries, they don't have them so much anymore. So if that applies to you, you can bring it. And obviously, if you're doing a virtual interview, so either it's over the phone or over Skype, have that stuff ready anyways. Already it's there in case anybody asks you a question. Have a copy of your resume, know where you saved it on your computer in case they ask you to email it. You can do that right away. So now we're getting to the part where we're going to talk about what happened during the interview. So all of these things are really important so that your interview goes well and hopefully you end up getting the job. So the first thing is first impressions. And first impressions start from when you walk in the building. And I have known a couple of people who have forgotten about this rule. So I usually like to say, as soon as you leave your house, you're in interview mode. And I find it helpful to pretend like I'm an actor or an actress. And I'm just, I'm playing the part of somebody who's going for an interview as soon as I leave my house. So the way I'm dressed, the way that I speak, the way that I treat other people is, I'm really thinking about that so I can make a good impression. Okay, so the way that you are sitting, if you're sitting up nice and tall, looking alert, that makes a good impression on people because that shows that you're interested, that you're paying attention. If you're sitting and you're slouching and your eyes are closed, that's not good. And also, if you're waiting to go in for your interview, keep your phone away. You don't need to have it out. You want to be sitting there. You want to be able to make eye contact with people when they come and call your name to say, okay, it's time to go in to meet the people who are going to be interviewing you. You don't want to be fumbling around with your phone and trying to put that away. So as hard as it is, because I know everybody nowadays, when we have a free second, we like to scroll on Facebook. Don't do that for your interview. Keep your phone away because those first impressions are really important. And another thing that's really important is to treat all the staff in the building with respect. So I have actually experienced somebody who came in to where we work once for an interview, and they were not nice to the staff at the front desk. And those staff at the front desk went right to our manager and they said, look, this person was extremely rude to us. I don't think this is somebody that we want on our staff. So keep that in mind as well. That's why I say as soon as you leave the house, you're in interview mode. You're super polite, you're conscientious, you're always thinking about your first impression because that does make a big difference. So a lot of my clients ask me, what should I wear to the interview? And again, I know in certain countries, when you have an interview, you always wear your best clothes. It doesn't matter what it's for. But in Canada, you really need to dress according to the job that you're applying for. So what I like to say is this, think about what people wear in the workplace where you're going for your interview. And there's ways that you can figure this out. You can, take a walk by a couple days before. If you hand it in or if you're going to hand in your resume, pay attention to what people are wearing, how they're dressed. And then just dress a little bit nicer than that. So you're going to make a good impression. The people who are interviewing you will know that you made an effort, which is important for employers in Canada. They want to know that somebody made an effort, that they tried to make a good impression. but you also are aware of the job that you're going to be doing. So a good example, if you're doing or going for an interview for a construction company and you're just going to be a laborer, so you're just going to be assisting with the construction, going in a full suit and tie is probably not a good idea. You definitely for that interview would want to wear a nice pair of pants, maybe a nice top, and maybe your work boots, because that shows that you understand the job that you're applying for. So that's a really important thing to remember when you're choosing what to wear. The other thing that I like to point out is to keep your clothes simple, keep makeup and accessories to a minimum, because that sometimes is just really distracting and people might focus on that and not on what you're saying. Don't wear strong scents. So perfume, cologne, even really strong deodorant. A lot of people have allergies to that, and a lot of workplaces are now scent free. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the interview questions that you might get asked. They're definitely going to ask you questions that relate to the job duties. So when you saw the job ad and they listed all the duties that you were going to be doing, they're going to be asking you, can you do this? And can you give me an example of a time when you did this? So a really good way to start preparing for your interview is to go through all of the things listed in the job ad and think to yourself, can I do this? And if you can, if you have done it, you need to remind yourself, well, when did I do this? How did I do this? So you're ready to answer those questions. And if you can't, then a really good answer is to say, you know what, I've proven in the past that I'm very good at learning new skills, and I think I can learn this skill fairly easily. Okay, but you really need to prepare for that. They're going to ask you questions about your ability to work with other people. In Canada, working as part of a team is very important. And that also means that people get along with each other. So we don't tend to argue with people in the workplace here. That's seen as something negative. And I know in certain other countries, it's very appropriate to, get into an argument or a discussion with someone in the workplace. We don't tend to do that here. So employers are really looking for people who can work harmoniously with others in the workplace. They're going to ask you questions that let the interviewers get to know you and your personal strengths. So they might start off the interview with, tell me about yourself. And we're going to talk about how to answer that question. But they do want to know you. And so that's, again, where you're going to have to be talking about your skills, which I know can be very difficult for some people. So it's a good thing to start practicing. And they will ask you questions about previous jobs as well. All right. So I'm just going to give some tips for some of the best answers. So this is our employer. So Soraya is our employer. She's going to be giving the interview today to Mohammed, and he is applying for a graphic design job. So we're going to be seeing their interactions and seeing the questions that they ask each other. And we're also going to learn about why the employer is asking certain questions, because that's a really important thing to know, so that you can answer the questions properly. The first question is, tell me about yourself, and how would you answer this question? So just think to yourself for a second, if an employer asks you this, what immediately comes to mind? The employer is asking this question, tell me about yourself, because they think it's an easy question, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But they also want to get to know your skills and experience. And they don't want to hear anything personal unless it's important for the job. And that's a really important thing to remember. So everything you say should be about the job, not about your personal life. So here's a really good example. And this is the time too when you can use your 30-second pitch. So this is something I talk about with my clients a lot. It's a little speech about yourself that you memorize that talks about your education and your employment history, and also talks about your skills. Okay, so you can use that, Or you can just give an answer like Mohammed, and he says, I've been, working as a graphic designer for 10 years. He also really likes to volunteer and give back to the community. So that's a really good answer. He's talked about the fact that he's a very experienced graphic designer, and he's really passionate about it too. So that's a really good answer. Why did you leave your last job? Some employers might ask this question if it's not too clear on your resume. And for a lot of my clients who have moved to Canada, their answer is, I moved to Canada, so I had to leave my job, which is a totally fine answer. But the employer's asking this because they want to know, did you leave your last job on good terms? Because their employers are curious about this. And if you did happen to get fired from your last job, which does happen to people, or people get let go, it's really important to be honest about that. There's ways that you can explain that and say, you know what, it wasn't the best job for me, but here's what I learned while I was working there. But if you did just happen to leave your last job because you moved to Canada, then that's that's an okay answer. Some people leave their last job because they wanted to focus on their education. Again, that's a really positive response. That's totally okay. People leave jobs, and as long as you're honest about it and you have a positive spin on it, so you can say positive things about it, then it's really not something that you need to worry about. So Mohammed says, at my last job, he learned many new skills, but he chose to leave because he wanted to focus more on working with charities. That's a really nice answer too. How would you deal with an angry customer? So again, customer service is very important here in Canada, and it's not just for people who are working in retail. Customers or clients are very important, and in many companies, I would say most companies, it's very important for all the staff to understand how to give good customer service, but also how to work with somebody who's maybe not happy about the service that they received. Yes, employment, we help people find jobs. We still do talk about customer service. We talk about client service. Our clients are very important to us, and we want to give them the best possible service that we can. So you might encounter this question, even if you're not applying for a frontline customer service job. And it's really important to think about how you would deal with someone who is upset, who is an angry customer or an angry client. And the employer, again, they want to know this because they want to hire someone who can handle those stressful situations, because it is stressful when somebody's angry with you, and still give good customer service. So this is the time when we like to tell a little story, and think back to a time maybe when you helped someone when you were at work who was not happy, and you want to share this story. And what you want is for, the employer to have the impression that you can handle this. So you want to be calm and positive. You want to emphasize how you would show empathy to this person, how you listen, and how you do your very best to solve their problem. And if you can't solve the problem, then you find someone who can, like a manager or a senior member of staff. So a really good way to answer this is something like what Mohammed says. I've learned not to take things that customers say about their experience personally, and I always try to really understand the complaint and do the best I can to solve the issue. And if he can't solve the issue, he says I would find a manager or senior staff who could. And you can also mention the fact that you understand that every company is going to have a different set of rules and procedures about customer service, so you would follow those as well. So what is your biggest weakness? A lot of my clients ask me, how do I answer this question? What should I say? This one can be a really, really tricky question, because a lot of the time people are wondering, well, why would the employer ask me this? Like, I'm coming for the interview. Surely they want to know what I can do well. But a lot of employers ask this because they want to know Are you realistic about the things that you can improve on? Everybody has a weakness. Everybody has things that they can improve, that they can do better. Um, and I think what employers have found is the people who can identify their weaknesses are the people who are easy to work with because they will admit when they make a mistake and they will try and learn from that mistake. Somebody who says, I don't have a weakness, I'm perfect, that's just not true. And, I think employers have found that those people are more difficult to work with because when you go to them and you say you made a mistake, they don't want to listen to it. So it's a very important question, and how we answer that is really important as well. And one of the most important things is you have to be honest and share a real weakness that you have, but you want to explain what you're doing to improve on that weakness. And don't say you're a perfectionist. Everyone, like lots of people say that. And I think it does come across as being insincere. So you're really not telling the truth. Everybody has a weakness, including me. Everybody does. So Mohammed's weakness is also my weakness. And I often become very busy with clients. I love working with clients. I love helping them, which can sometimes take over my day. And that leaves me less time to complete paperwork. And paperwork is important because we have to report to the government who we are helping. So that's a kind of an important part of my job. But I don't like doing it because I think it's really boring. So now what I do is I schedule time on my calendar, little bits at a time, to make sure that it gets done. So that's my weakness, but that's what I'm doing to improve on it. And it's really important to have that answer like memorized and ready to say, because this is a very important question for a lot of employers. How do you handle conflict? So, we talked about previously being able to work with people in the workplace in Canada. Dealing with conflict is really important because, again, employers don't want their employees to be arguing with each other all the time. That's not seen as a good thing. They like people to be calm and to solve problems. And so this is another time where you might tell a little story of a conflict that you solved properly in the workplace. Okay. And again, the employers want to know, like, it's important because they want people to be pleasant. They want people to help each other. They don't want to have to get involved in workplace conflicts because they don't have time for that. So the way to answer this is tell a little story, only give the facts. So keep your feelings out of it. Do not share how angry you were with this person. We don't talk about that. We just say, this person and myself had a disagreement and this is what we did. So we stay positive and we have that answer prepared. Okay. You have to have it memorized because otherwise you can very quickly go off track, and that is not a good thing when you are answering this question. Short and sweet, tell your story and be done with it. So Mohammed's answer says, he once worked in a store where the early shift felt the late shift weren't doing all their duties, and vice versa. So, the other group felt the same. And once they sat down and listened to each other, they made a list of duties for, each group to complete and wrote it down so everyone could refer to it. And they made sure that everyone was doing what they had to do. Okay, great. There was a problem, they sat down, they solved it. And there's no emotion in there. He doesn't talk about any of his feelings of anger. He just states the facts, gives his story, and then he's done. So this question also can be very tricky. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, or it could be 10 years, 15 years even? And just have a quick think to yourself, how would you answer this question? Because the employers want to know if you really want this job. They want to hire someone who stays with the company because training new people costs money. It's time away from other employees' jobs. It's a lot of money and work to train a new employee. And if companies are always having to do this, then they're not as profitable. So they want to see Do you actually want to stay in this job? But they're also wondering, are your goals realistic? So we have to give an answer that's kind of very well thought out, because if we don't think this through, and again, memorize this, then you might say something that the employer is not really happy about. So the things that you can talk about are focus on, how you want to grow within your field, maybe eventually take on more responsibility, maybe do some learning as part of this job. Do not say, I will be doing your job. That is not a good answer because the people who usually interview are the ones who've been at the company for a long time. They've worked very hard for many, many years to get where they are. And when somebody brand new comes in and says, in 5 years, I'm going to be doing your job, they see that as being very arrogant. And we don't really value that in the workplace at all. So, talk about growing, maybe taking on more responsibility. That's kind of what we need to be thinking to answer this question. So Mohammed says, in 5 years, I'd like to be a good employee, maybe take on some new responsibilities, getting new clients interested in the business, or doing more work with charities. Okay, so that's great. It shows that he's thinking long term, but he's also being realistic. He's saying, like, you know what, I understand that I have learning to do, but I'm ambitious. I want to, work really hard. That answer says all of that without him actually saying it. So it's a really good example to use to answer that question. What will your references say about you? So some employers like to ask this just to see, again, if you're realistic about, you know, about your past work history. So they want to see, like, are you a good employee, and are you going to be honest about, what your references might say about you. So again, we want to be positive, but we can also be modest. We don't have to, list off all the wonderful things that we've ever done. But you can mention a few of your good qualities. And I know that if you come from a culture where talking about yourself in that positive light is difficult, this is something that you might need to practice. But it is expected that when you answer this question, that you will be able to say a few good things about yourself, if that's what your references would say about you. And it doesn't have to be very long. I mean, Mohammed just says, my last employer would say that I was great with the clients and always did a good job. She was happy with my work. It can be as simple as that. If you think your references will say that about you, then you can just say a very short statement. Why do you want this job? So again, on the surface, this seems like a very easy question. You might say, well, I need a job, I need to pay my bills. But there are some specific things that employers will be looking for in this answer, and things they don't want you to say. So they really want to know, are you motivated by the job itself? So they don't want to hire somebody who only wants the money, even though they understand people work because they need the money, but they also want someone who's passionate about the job. Whatever it is, they want someone who's going to enjoy doing the job and stay there. So you want to show your enthusiasm for the position. So you can talk about why you're excited about this, why you'd like to do this. You can mention the company's values, which you can find if you do your research before. The things that we don't talk about, though, we don't talk about health benefits or vacation. Those are what I call me questions. And we don't want to be talking about things like that. We want to talk about things that relate to the actual job that you're excited about, that you're going to be doing. Okay, that's a really important thing. So Mohammed says, I'm very excited to work for your company because I feel I can grow as a graphic designer. And I also like your company's values of giving back to the community. Great. What's your greatest accomplishment? So again, this might be a fairly difficult question to ask if you are from a culture where this is not the norm, where you do not talk about your accomplishments. But again, employers are using it to really see, what kind of an employee you're going to be. What is it that you're proud of? And you can definitely share something work related. In fact, you should share something work related for this question, which might make it a little bit easier. So maybe it's an idea that you brought forward, a project that you led, or an experience you had that showcases your skills. So one thing that Mohammed's proud of is he learned to speak English when he came to Canada. English is not an easy language to learn. He studied hard and now he's fluent. So that's a great example because he worked every day. It shows that he's determined, he's organized, he can work towards a long-term goal. All of those things are very good qualities to have in the workplace. So that's one answer that you can give, but I'm sure that all of you have done some really wonderful things and you'll be able to talk about that as well. How do you manage your time? So again, this is a really important question because in Canada, we are very focused on time. Being on time, if somebody tells you to show up at 9, you should really be there 5 or 10 minutes early. We are very focused on time and getting things done when we say we're going to do them. So this is a really important question. And again, one that you really need to know why the employer is asking it. Can you be organized? Can you get work done on time? And you need to have this memorized. So again, think about how you like to stay organized. Some people use lists. Some people have a list on their computer and they can change it depending on the different priorities. Some people use a calendar. I really like using my Outlook calendar. Some people use their phone. However it is that you stay organized and get your work done, think about that and then have that answer ready for the employer because they are going to want to know how you do that. So being organized is very important to Mohammed. He keeps a list of things to do. He uses his calendar to schedule time to complete all of his work. Awesome. So I really wanted to touch on some questions that you can ask the interviewer. So it's common once they've done asking their questions, they might say to you, do you have any questions? And it's a really good idea to have some questions prepared. This may not be common in other parts of the world, but generally it's seen as a good idea. It really shows that you've done your research about the company, that you're very interested in the company. So think about some questions that you might be able to ask. So employers don't like questions that we talked about those me questions. So about health benefits, vacation, flexible time. They don't really like those types of questions at the interview. Those are questions that you would ask once you've had the job, once you've been offered the job and you've accepted it, and then you can ask some of those questions. So you want to think about questions about the job itself, possibly maybe asking about goals for the company. Is there an opportunity for promotion if I work really hard? Those are okay questions to ask because it's about the company itself and the job. So some examples of that. What is the company culture like? Does the company support employees taking courses or doing extra training? That's a great question because it shows that you're already thinking about improving your skills. Is there an opportunity to advance if I perform well? So advance is a good word to use instead of promotion, I feel, because it's a little bit more understated. How would my performance be measured? Another great question. What are some of the goals for the company? Okay, so all of these questions are really good. You only really need to maybe ask one or two unless you have more questions. And if you're like me and you get very, very nervous at interviews, here is a little helpful tip. If you completely forget your questions, you can mention something that was already discussed and explain that this was one of your questions, but thank you very much. Now you've answered it for me. So again, Mohammed's example is, I was going to ask about your customer service policy, but that was already answered. I don't have any other questions at this time. So if you do forget it, this is my helpful tip. I have actually done this once, and kind of saved me, I felt like, because I really wanted to show that I did actually have a question. So questions that the interviewer is not allowed to ask you. And again, this is about your rights, and it's really important to know this. And you can answer the questions if you do get asked this question. They shouldn't really be asking them, but if it does happen, you can choose whether you would like to answer or not. But I like to inform everyone that there's certain questions that you don't have to answer and that should not be asked. So employers are not allowed to ask questions about age, race, religion, country of birth, if you're married or plan on having children, or disability. And this is to avoid discrimination. Okay. So if you're just at an interview and they're asking you, oh, like, what religion are you or what country are you from? They are not supposed to be asking that. And you can just, you can sometimes say, I don't know what this has to do with the job duties, or I don't know, if this is related to the job that I would be doing. You don't have to, but you can if you feel comfortable. Um, but they can ask if you are legally entitled to work in Canada. So if you are a citizen, permanent resident, or if you have a work permit, um, that's an important thing for them to know, if you are legally entitled to work in Canada. And they can ask for certain certificates or licenses. So if the job requires that you have a full G license, they can ask that. They can ask if you're serving alcohol, do you have your smart serve? Do you have your WHMIS training or your worker health and safety training? The mandatory training that you need to do if you're working in Ontario, the worker health and safety. So they can ask those questions. And they can also ask about age if they're saying, are you, 19 so you can serve alcohol, or something like that. Okay, so if it's related to the job, if it's necessary for you to do the job, then they can ask it. If it's not, they can't. So after the interview, I'm just going to give a few little tips and information following up, and also accepting the job if you are offered the job. So I always think it's a good idea to send a follow-up email. It doesn't have to be very long. This is an example. If you'd like to screenshot this and use it, please feel free. But it's basically just a quick email to say thank you very much for the opportunity. So if they're considering maybe 2 or 3 candidates, and they're talking about it and thinking, who should we hire, and then they get a lovely email from you, that might just make them decide to hire you. They might say, wow, like, you know what, this person is really interested in the job. That's important to us. We're going to go ahead and hire this person. So it's always a good idea to send one, perhaps the day after. Don't send it right away. Give them a little bit of time. But it's a good idea to do that. So definitely, if you, like I said, if you'd like to screenshot this and use it, please feel free to do that. If you get offered the job, you don't have to accept right away. If they call you on the phone, you can ask them how much time you have to respond, keeping in mind they're not going to give you weeks of time. I'm talking like a couple of days maximum, but you can ask them how much time you have. And it's okay to do some research. It's also okay to ask for a written job offer, and maybe ask a friend or something, what they think about it. That's totally fine. But definitely you don't want to make them wait for more than a few days, because they might actually just decide to go with someone else at that point. Things tend to happen fairly quickly in Canada once you get offered the job. Negotiating salary. So it's really important to do your research and be realistic. If you applied for a job and the salary was listed, that's what it's going to be. If it's not listed, you should be prepared to negotiate. So do your research. You can look things up on the job bank online about typical salaries, but you really need to think about too where you are. So in Canada, we're based in North Bay, Ontario. We're a small town. We're not near, we're, 3.5 hours north of Toronto. So pay is going to be a little bit less because we're not living in a big expensive city. So when you do your research, make sure that you're researching similar companies and what people get paid in the area where you live. Well, that concludes our presentation about interviews. I hope you found it very helpful, and please use this as a resource, and hopefully you'll be watching some of the other videos that we're going to be posting in the future. Thank you.